Hi, how are you? I wanted to talk to you today about evergreen clauses. I sometimes get questions about what are these evergreen clauses, also known as automatic renewal periods under contracts. And these often come up within my space, at least, in software as a service agreements and also software license agreements. So let's break it down. The word evergreen means perpetually green. It's a term often used for plants or trees. And evergreen clauses, they are clauses that keep the green coming in for a supplier, that are keeping the money, the dollars that are green, coming in. And so they're typically a clause that wherein in the contract, you're agreeing to an initial contract period and an initial contract period. And thereafter, there's an automatic renewal period, often for that same block period. So let me give you an example of the wording you might see. You could have a contract that says the parties agree that the initial term of the contract shall be for a 2-year period and shall automatically extend thereafter for 2 years at a time unless either party gives the other party 90 days written notice of termination prior to the conclusion of the initial term or any 2-year period thereafter. So that's kind of how the language works. So the unfortunate thing, if you're a customer here, let's say you decide in the 25th month, you've just passed the 2-year period, you decide in the 25th month, you know what, I no longer need this service or product, I want to terminate. Well, according to that contract clause, that evergreen contract clause, the contract has automatically extended for a block of 2 years. That's 24 more months. So you would have to essentially be paying for 23 more months before you're out of this contract, and you might not even be using the software or service. So the whole point here, from my perspective, is for companies sourcing in solutions, it's very good to avoid, when possible, these types of evergreen clauses. It's much better to commit to a term upfront, maybe a year or two, if it's reasonably foreseeable that you're really going to be using the software during that period. But then thereafter, have the right to terminate at any time for 30 days notice, instead of it rolling for another 2-year period as a block, let's say. Some sourcing companies, they're worried about fixing prices so they don't automatically or at the whim of the supplier somehow get hiked very high. You can regulate that in contracts very well. You could also, if you have the right to terminate with 30 days notice as the customer, it doesn't mean for convenience the supplier should have the same right. You can have different terms for the supplier versus the customer here. For instance, the supplier maybe can't terminate the contract but for cause, and that is, for instance, if you're not paying for a 5-year period. And also maybe that supplier has no right to raise its prices during that 5-year period. You can agree to that contract clause. That's totally permissible. If you want to allow some kind of increase in pricing under a software agreement or a software as a service subscription, then why not tie it to some kind of index, like a consumer price index or an IT index, so that the party is only able to raise the annual fees by a certain percentage point, kind of reflecting inflationary implications. Well, that's really it. That's an evergreen clause. Those are the issues that pop up. In some jurisdictions, they're not legal to be imposed on consumers. In some, they're not permitted to be imposed on B2B agreements either, business-to-business agreements. So you have to be careful what jurisdiction you're in, but also if you're licensing in solutions or buying a software as a service subscription, do your best to avoid these evergreen clauses, the automatic renewal periods, because circumstances change, as we all know, and dramatically and suddenly you might realize that we no longer need this, and why lock in for a 2-year period if you don't have to, or another extended period of time. That's it. Take care of yourself. And I just wanted to say, if you didn't know, I have a book on my website, www.b2world.com/books. It's called the U.S. Business and Legal Guide for 2021. It's absolutely free, 169 pages of really useful information if you're heading into the U.S. market. That's it. Take care of yourself. Good luck with business and stay healthy.